Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events. We are closing in on 100 subscribers, so shout out to everybody that's been signing up to the service, and it is a great service at that in terms of helping you prep for these upcoming MMA events. With the Contender series pretty much in full swing now, I know a lot of people have been utilizing this service so they know what to expect on Tuesday nights and who they can back with their money, or at least decide pre-fight who they think is going to end up getting the contract. Not just the Contender series, but 17 different promotions from all over the world. Just to close off August, we got LFA, PFL, Road to UFC, Brave CF, KSW, another LFA card, and then to kick off April or September, we have Aries FC, A1 Combat, Cage Warriors has 3 events, OKTAGON has 2 events, Bellator has a couple of events as well. We have all of those events already posted on the MMA Fight Archive with direct links to past fights for all the competitors on those cards. Make sure you guys check it out with a 7-day free trial. Link for that is in the description below. And again, if you are a subscriber of the Fight Archive already, please pass it along, share it with a friend, let them know about the service, especially if they're into handicapping or breaking down fights. This is the best way to do so to save yourself some time. All right. Appreciate the understanding in regards to the delay and tardiness of the podcast this week. You might still be able to hear it in my voice. I talked about it when I dropped the Contender Series breakdown earlier this week. Dealing with some illnesses, tonsillitis, and just bad shit, and I have not been feeling the greatest. So I've been taking my time getting through the UFC card this week. Wasn't really putting a flame under my ass to try to get this out ASAP. I just wanted to do it at my own pace and what my health would allow me to do. Bad week for this to happen as well, because we got a ton of content to get through, not just with the UFC, but I'll have a PFL breakdown for you guys hopefully by Thursday evening, so stay tuned for that. I'll also be breaking down Road to UFC, both episodes, as well as LFA and KSW. Excuse me. Those will strictly be in written form on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. So if you want access to that, check out the MMALOTN Patreon page. Link for that in the description below. Otherwise, I have you guys covered for the UFC and the PFL on the YouTube channel here. I'll be skipping out on the quick picks for you guys on Thursday. Instead, I'll be dropping the top 3 Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night segment on that date. And then on Fridays, we'll do the usual free parlay and 3 best prop bets as well. So again, shout out to you guys for bearing with me and sending the love and the and the well wishes in the comment section of the Contender Series breakdowns. Appreciate you guys. I'm almost over this hill now. I'm feeling pretty much 90% there, but you might be able to hear it in my voice still. So I'm going to try to get through this card, not as in depth as I normally do. Again, I want to save my voice as much as I can. I got a PFL podcast for you guys to do tomorrow as well. So yeah, hopefully my strength holds up, and hopefully I'm not coughing too much, or I don't have to do too much editing on this podcast. All right, so this week we're going to be talking about UFC Vegas 96, headlined by a middleweight matchup between Cannonier and Borralho, a passing of the torch in the sense, or we'll see if Cannonier can halt the momentum of Borralho. We also have the Tough 32 finale on this card roll. We'll have middleweights, Ryan Loder and Robert Valentin going at it. And then featherweights, we got Ofli and Myron Santos going at it. And not to mention, there is another Ultimate Fighter card, Ultimate Fighter fight on this card with Gigamantis Ramaska, who was actually injured going into the semifinal bout, and he was pulled out of the tournament. So the UFC is deciding to give him another opportunity here, and he takes on Paddy Pimblett's training partner and another guy that was on the Ultimate Fighter, Nathan Fletcher. So not the strongest of cards this weekend, but if you've been watching the Ultimate Fighter, I'm sure some of these matchups will be very intriguing. And in terms of betting opportunities, this seems like a favorite heavy card in my opinion. So we'll see if I can make enough, breakdowns, or at least make enough points for some of the underdogs here. But for the most part, I think we're going to see favorites do a pretty damn good job on this card. So quick recap of last weekend's card. Not the greatest card for you, boy. Lock of the night ends up shitting the bed in Steve Erceg. We go 58-29 on the year for a 67% hit rate now. And then dog of the nights, we actually go 2-1 over the weekend. But for the UFC, we had Walter Walker as he goes out there and submits Junior Tafa in the first round. And that now increases our dog of the night record on the year to 28-61. Going up a percent now to 31%. So again, not the greatest performance, but still want to get back into the profit for the dog of the night play. And then lastly, shout out to the Godzilla wins, folks. I'll be dropping those articles as I normally do Thursdays for the main event breakdown. And then Fridays for the 3 best money line spots. So make sure you guys check them out. GodzillaWins.com. All right. I don't want to waste my breath too much here. Again, like I said, I'm going to get through these breakdowns pretty efficiently compared to what you guys are normally used to hearing from me and going as in-depth as I normally do. So let's get right to it. First fight of the night, flyweight matchup, UFC debut of Wang Kong coming in at minus 1,200 as she goes up against Victoria Leonardo, who comes in at plus 800. Wang is a very solid kickboxer coming from a decorated kickboxing background. She's now 5-0 in the MMA cage, most recently picking up a victory on road to UFC last year, where she dominated her opponent and got the first round submission. Normally, she picks her opponents apart with her striking and finds the finish that way, but it's encouraging to see her grappling improving, just as we've seen over the last couple of fights. She also has a win on the regional scene over former UFC fighter Yanan Wu. She's going up against Victoria Leonardo, who is badass in terms of not saying no to anybody that the UFC throws at her. Obviously, it worked out for her on the Contender series when she pulled off a plus 250 upset against Chelsea Hackett, but then unfortunately she was put up against Manon Fiorot and Melissa Gatto in back-to-back matchups, and she got finished in both of them. Picked up a win over Mandy Baum in a grinding, grappling approach, and then ended up getting knocked out by Natalia Silva last year. Now, Leonardo is a fighter who has some decent kicks, some decent taekwondo, flashy kicks. She does her best work when she can grind her opponents against the cage and try to use her physicality there, but I think she's going to struggle to do that here against Wang Kong, who should be able to have the advantage no matter where this matchup ends up going. I think we'll see Wang do a good job in terms of keeping this in the striking realm. I think she picks apart Victoria Leonardo, and I think she actually finishes her in the first round. I saw the round 1 KO prop at plus 350. I think that's a damn good shot to take a shot on, especially when you're considering that the money line here is minus 1,200. But I also like the under, especially if you can get the under 1.5 at plus money. Next matchup, Zigomantis Ramaska going up against Nathan Fletcher. Ramaska coming in at plus 145, going up against Fletcher, who comes in at minus 170. Now, Ramaska on the show, he was technically supposed to face Myron Santos in his second tough fight. The first one, he had a war against Bekzad Usmanov, and unfortunately for him, they were unable to clear him for his second matchup, and then they plugged in somebody else, but Santos beat them anyway and makes it to the finale, which we'll see later on in this card. And then the UFC did the right thing by bringing him back in for this tough finale card and giving him another opportunity. He had a war, like I said, against Usmanov. Both guys had tremendous success. I think it was Ramaska, obviously, who ended up having more success, but he did get dropped in that fight and hurt very badly. Now, watching his tape from the regional scene, he is on a 3-fight winning streak as of now, but there are some moments where you see him in some sticky situations, specifically when it comes to the grappling realm. I've seen him get fully mounted, and his opponent was doing some decent work from on top, but for some reason, the referee decided to stand them up, and that allowed Zigomantis to get back into the game, and then eventually find a knockout over that opponent in the second round. His striking is fun. He's entertaining. He loves to throw down, loves to scrap, has some decent power as well, but I think where he has some glaring holes is going to be in that grappling game, which is where I think Nathan Fletcher could have a lot of success. Now, Fletcher is a guy that trains with Paddy Pimblett and is a highly touted prospect coming from the Cage Warrior scene, but he did fall short to Con Ofli, who ended up making it to the finale in the first fight in the house. So it's unfortunate to see him get eliminated so quickly, but it also was revealed later on in that season that he did injure his leg pretty much at the beginning of the fight, and it didn't really help him out throughout the rest of it. Would he have won had he not gotten injured? Maybe, maybe not. But at least the UFC is doing the right thing and giving him another opportunity here. He is a grapple-heavy fighter. He is very strong when he's able to establish that top position. He scrambles very well, and he is very good in terms of just waiting for his moment to snatch up a submission and take it on home with him. But he also has some nasty ground and pound as well. In terms of this matchup here against Ramaska, I do think Fletcher is the side. He is the minus 170 favorite, and I do think we'll see him go out there and really put the grind on Ramaska here. Ramaska is going to be able to, or going to have to dictate the pace, keep this in the striking realm, and stop the takedowns that are coming his way. But I think Fletcher is going to be too strong for him and too good in the wrestling, which will eventually get this fight to the ground. And I think we'll see Fletcher start to slice through his guard like butter and eventually set up a submission opportunity for himself where he ends up getting the tap. So give me Fletcher and Fletcher by submission. Next up, women's bantamweight matchup here with Jacqueline Cavalcanti coming in at minus 215, going up against Josiane Nunes, who comes in at plus 185. Now, starting off on the Cavalcanti side, she's been in the UFC for over a year now, but it's also been a year since we've seen her as she made her debut back in September of last year, where she swept the scorecards by defeating Zara Fairn. That was a matchup where she used a disciplined and technical striking approach, and even though she was the one on the back foot pretty much that entire fight, she did a great job in terms of staying active with her lead leg kick and landing slick combinations down the pipe that continuously hurt and damage Zara Fairn. We don't see Cavalcanti often going to her grappling, but if she feels like she's getting overwhelmed or outstruck, that's when she looks to take fights to the ground and do good work from that top position. Originally, she's been training at a Black House alongside Piedra Rodriguez and former UFC fighter Sabina Mazo, but it seems since she's joined the UFC, she's taken full advantage of the UFC PI, and now she lives in Vegas and taking full advantage of their, nutrition plans and the training space that they provide. She seems to be a very solid fighter at 26 years old, solid 6-1 record, very slick striking, seems to be a solid all-around fighter, and I think that this is a great matchup for her to go out there and pick up a second straight victory. She's going up against Josiane Nunes, who finally ended up losing a UFC fight in her fourth attempt as she ended up getting grinded out by Chelsea Chandler. That night, Chandler utilized takedowns in the first and second rounds to keep Nunes on her back while landing big shots. Unfortunately, Chandler was unable to keep up that pressure and success in the third round, and she ate some big shots from Nunes. Luckily, Chandler was able to survive to see the final bell, and she was able to get her hand raised by unanimous decision. Now, Nunes is a fighter that is always going to be undersized for this weight class, so it would be nice to see her kind of try to change her body and try to get down to 115 or 125 pounds. But at 5'2", she's always going to be on the shorter end of the stick here. It paid off for her against fighters like Bea Malecki, Ramona Pascual, and Zara Fairn, who just are not as assertive of strikers, or at least not as technical of strikers, and Nunes was able to crowd their distance, crowd their space, and utilize her big striking approach to really hurt these opponents and even knock out Bea Malecki. I remember being at that card, and it was just so weird to see her swinging so wildly and being so successful with it, especially against somebody that was coming from a striking background. Now, in this matchup, I do think Cavalcanti is intelligent enough and technical enough to cause Nunes a ton of trouble. She utilizes her footwork and movement very well while staying active off of her back foot. She's going to have to play the matador here, as Nunes will be looking to crash the pocket, but I also wouldn't be surprised if we see Cavalcanti look to take this to the ground and just keep Nunes away from the power strike that's made her so successful. Now, I do like the Cavalcanti side, and I don't mind the chalk on her as well. I would kind of lean with her by finish, especially if I knew that she would be consistently trying to take this fight to the ground. But given her passiveness in certain spots, I think we'll see her look to outstrike Nunes, mix in the takedowns here and there, but for the most part, win this fight on the scorecards. Next up, lightweight banger here, as we have Vyacheslav Borshchev coming in at minus 210, going up against James Llontop, who comes in at plus 185. Now, Borshchev got an absolute whooping from Chase Hooper last time around in a matchup where you could credit his defensive grappling to the point that he wasn't really getting submitted. He was getting put in some bad spots. He was eating some big ground and pound, but he did a great job in terms of trying to scramble and try to get out of those spots. But Hooper had him in a bad spot ever since he dropped dropped him in the opening seconds of that fight. Hooper is kind of accepting the fact that he's going to have to start swinging wildly on the feet and try to pressure his opponents to either drop them or at least parlay a takedown behind those attempts so that he can get fights to the ground and utilize the strength that he has. And he did it beautifully against Borshchev in the first round, and then in the second round he was able to do it again. We saw Borshchev actually get stuck in a dart stroke, I believe it was, and he was trying to get out of the position, and it may have looked like he tapped once. I'll say that. So I can give the benefit of the doubt to the referee there in terms of how it looked, but I could also see how that was not interpreted as a tap, as Borshchev was trying to scramble to a position that he can start working on getting out of that choke. Technically, he's saying he didn't tap. I believe him. But I could also see from the vantage point of the referee of how he saw that as potentially being a submission as well, or at least a tap. Borshchev, we know what he's good at. Amazing kickboxer, great body work, great leg kicks, sets up his traps very well, throws perfect combinations, and we obviously see that his defensive grappling is improving. He might not be able to beat fighters in that realm, but at least he can go up against fighters that are not as good of jiu-jitsu artists as Hooper and survive on the ground, get back to his feet, and get back to his striking game. His opponent this weekend, James Llontop, came up short in his UFC debut earlier this year after picking up his Contender Series contract late last year. He ended up coming up short against Chris Padilla, who came in on short notice and utilized a grapple-heavy approach to eventually catch Llontop in a submission and force the tap out of him in the first round. Llontop is a scrapper. He is your stereotypical Latin American fighter that loves to crash forward and utilize big power punches to try to knock his opponents out. His durability is not that bad either, but he'll usually come up short against guys that have better technical striking. And that's what he's facing this weekend in Borshchev, who should have that advantage and not have too much trouble in terms of implementing that style. Obviously, Llontop could land a big shot and cause some troubles to Borshchev, but if Borshchev sticks to his game plan and if his durability pays off as we've seen in the past, he should be able to outstrike Llontop here, and I think that will eventually lead to a knockout victory for Vyacheslav Slavaklaus Borshchev. All right, let's move on to the middleweights here as we have Zachary Reese coming in at minus 550 going up against Jose Medina, who comes in at plus 400. Now, starting off on the Zachary Reese side, he did suffer his first professional defeat 2 fights ago against Cody Brundage in a matchup where he got, I believe he got taken down. He was going for a submission, ended up getting slammed on his head and knocked out. But he did manage to bounce back with a 20-second knockout over Julian Marquez earlier this year. And that's the name of the game for Reese. Get in, get out. It's crazy how quickly this guy is able to get out of his fights. Now just take this in. In 8 fights, he's only gotten past the 2-minute mark once. In 4 of those fights, they finished in less than a minute. This guy's in and out of there pretty quickly because of the power that he brings to the table. He's explosive, he's fast, he has a ton of power, and he's pretty precise in terms of landing the power that he does and just finding the target and getting his opponents out of there. That beautiful uppercut that he landed against Julian Marquez was chef's kiss in terms of finding the button and finding that button. That's Reese's game. There's nothing else that we can really take from it, considering that we don't see him get extended in many of his fights, nor do we see him face much adversity. He's in the driver's seat from jump. Now he's going up against a guy in Jose Medina who's probably the worst signing in Contender Series history, although Dana has a pretty bad track record in terms of signing guys that don't deserve to be at this level. But Medina got swept on the scorecards and had almost no success in his Contender Series matchup late last year against Magomed Gadzhiesulev. Very weird circumstance there from Dana in terms of signing that guy. But Medina gets the call up because apparently he has it. And he is a guy that wasn't even training out of a legitimate gym going into that Contender Series matchup. So Dana was like, hey, go to a real gym, try to get some real training, and we'll see if we can, actually see if you have something with your game, considering the grit and durability that you brought to the table. Medina is a very average Latin American fighter who loves to crash the pocket, utilizes pressure, rely on his durability, and try to overwhelm and finish his opponents. But he's a little bit too slow, and he's a little bit too plodding, and I think that's going to allow Zachary Reese to just have target practice here and eventually find the finish in the first round again. You can get the under 1.5 around minus 155 at the time of this taping, that line likely will catch some steam as well. And so a lot of people might lean on the fact that Medina, he showed off amazing durability against Gaziasulav, but Reese is a much more potent finisher than Gaziasulav. Gaziasulav tried putting him through the ground with the wrestling, whereas Reese is just going to be looking to take his head off from jump, and I think he'll be successful in doing so, considering the speed and physicality advantage he has in this matchup. So I'm going to go Reese by knockout, probably Reese round 1. The under 1.5, a damn good way to go about it. If you're feeling freaky, go ahead, sprinkle that round 2 Medina, round 3 Medina, because we kind of assume that Reese is going to empty his tank early, as he usually does, and it more often than not pays off for him. But just in case, you got a good safety plan in those Medina round props. But I do think Reese wins, and he wins early here. All right, next up, lightweights going at it, as we got Denis Buzukja coming in at plus 125, taking on the short notice replacement, Francis Marshall, who comes in at minus 145 in this lightweight matchup. Now, Buzukja was originally scheduled to fight Danny Silva, which would have been a great striking battle between two guys that love to keep it in that range and try to one-up their opponents. And Buzukja could try to build upon that beautiful victory that he had over Connor Matthews, where he lit him up for about 10 minutes. And then knocked him out in the opening seconds of the third round. That was on the back end of 2 straight losses that he suffered at the hands of Sean Woodson, getting pretty much swept on the scorecards there, and then quickly decimated by Jamal Emmers. I believe that was in late 2023. But Buzukja showcased why he's good, in that Connor Matthews fight. He had a significant striking advantage there. He looked minus 800, and he just battered Connor Matthews with his combination striking, good footwork, and good kicking game as well. But when guys are able to dictate the pace against him, mix the martial arts, cause him to not be so comfortable and get into his groove in his striking realm, that's where he starts to fall short. That's where he starts to question himself, and that's where he ends up losing most of his fights, or the fights that he ends up losing. He's going up against a guy in Francis Marshall who's trying to buck a 0-2 trend that he currently has in the UFC. This guy is a guy that came up or started his MMA career and came up with Kurt Pellegrino from the New Jersey area, if I'm not mistaken. But since losing these 2 straight fights, he's decided to switch things up, and he moved down to Florida to join American Top Team, and he's gotten very close with Grant Dawson, and it seems like these guys train together quite often. That's going to be very good for Marshall and his confidence, because he's already a great blank canvas to try to mold into an even better fighter, and I really think that team down there and the training partners will help elevate his game. I think obviously Buzukja is going to be the better striker, but I think Marshall can mix it up enough in the striking to be competitive, but I ultimately think it's going to be the takedowns and the grappling from the Marshall side that will allow him to get the edge in this matchup. Yes, he has taken this fight on short notice, and yes, it's been a while since we've seen him in action, but I think the fact that this fight is taking place at lightweight while these guys are normally featherweights eliminates the pressure that Marshall has in terms of trying to cut the weight and make it, whereas he can just try to make 155 and then from there try to apply his game. According to his Instagram, he's been ready for a fight for the last couple of months, so I think he was just waiting for an opportunity like this, and I think it's a great one for him to go out there and bounce back and snap this 3-fight losing streak that he's on. So give me Marshall, and Marshall by decision. Next up, we got Edmund Shahbazyan coming in at minus 280 in this middleweight matchup, going up against Gerald Meerschaert, who comes in at plus 240. Starting off on the Shahbazyan side, he's coming off a beautiful knockout over AJ Dobson a couple months back, and that was a matchup where we saw the shining side of Edmund. We saw why he's so good and why he was so good pre-COVID. We know he went on that unfortunate, I believe it was 1-3 or 1-4 run after COVID, and a lot of people were saying that he got exposed, and we know what his issue is. He doesn't have the greatest cardio. When fights are fought at a high pace and he's forced to go into deep water, he doesn't usually end up swimming. He ends up drowning, just as Anthony Hernandez reminded us. But we saw in the Lungiambula and Dobson fights that when he can dictate the pace and utilize his striking, that's when he usually ends up coming out on top. He's quick, He's powerful, and he's very precise with his strikes as well. He does have a slick submission game that he can lean on if opponents want to try to mix it up in the grappling realm, but I think that he wants to stay away from that because that causes him to expend more energy than he should. He wants to keep fights in the striking realm where he can utilize his power and his speed, and I think that's something that he could do here against Gerald Meerschaert. Now, Meerschaert is the king of comebacks. This guy is, sometimes his durability shows up, sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't, you can knock him out in the first round. When it does, he's able to take a beating, get into deep waters, pull off the comeback, and end up submitting his opponents late in the matchups. But I think he's going to be up against it here in Shahbazyan. Minus 280 is too wide for me to trust a guy who is known for kind of having cardio issues, but considering his physical advantages here, his speed, his power, his footwork, his pure striking advantage, I expect him to have a field day with Gerald Meerschaert on the feet, and I think that's going to ultimately lead to a knockout victory for Shahbazyan. I would rather lean on that knockout prop than his money line. I'm going to go Shahbazyan by knockout. Next up, welterweights going at it here, where we got Magny coming in at plus 550, going up against Michael Morales, who comes in at minus 800. Now, last time around for Magny, he fought in January and pulled off a massive upset over Mike Malott, who was winning maybe 13 minutes of that matchup before Magny finally turned up the pressure, eventually got that top position and was able to pound out Malott and win that fight with about 15 seconds left on the clock. Malott did a good job in terms of implementing his grappling in the second round, utilizing his kicking and his strikes in the first round, but one thing that was kind of known about Malott is that sometimes his gas tank management is not the best, and Magny challenged it fully, and eventually it paid off for him in the third round of that fight. Magny is a guy that is still, somebody very tough to deal with, even though he's 37 years old and 10 plus years inside the UFC. This guy is not the greatest striker. He's not the greatest grappler, but he does a great job in terms of weaponizing his cardio, setting a high pace, and putting his opponents to the grind. He's very good in terms of pushing his opponents against the cage and utilizing his knees, his elbows, and even his shoulder strikes to keep them busy and really wear on them and then eventually break them. But there are two archetypes of fighters that can normally beat him. Guys that are technically way better strikers than him, or guys that are way better grapplers than him who can eventually submit him pretty quickly. Morales, I think he fits one of those two. I think he fits the technically better striker here. I think his speed and power will definitely allow him to kind of dictate the pace here, not to mention the kicking that he likes to implement in his game. If he can really chew that lead leg of Magny, that's going to cause Magny a lot of issues, just as we saw in the Ian Machado-Gary fight, and I think from there that can open up the rest of the game for Morales. If Morales wants the path of least resistance, I think it would be good for him to look to take this to the ground and keep Magny down, and that could even open up a submission opportunity for him. But I do think that Morales wins this fight more often than not. Minus 800 is just a little bit too wide for me to get behind. I feel that Morales actually ends up winning this fight by decision, but neither of those lines intrigue me enough to actually pull the trigger here. But I do think that this will be a passing of the torch type of fight. We'll see Morales win it. Magny is not a bad dog, especially at plus 550, given his experience and given his cardio edge in most matchups. But I just don't see how he ends up landing more damage than Morales, who should be able to get the better of most exchanges. All right, next up, we got the tough featherweight finale here, as we have Ofli coming in at plus 170, going up against Myron Santos, who comes in at minus 200. Now, Ofli was one of the hottest prospects coming into the Ultimate Fighter, and he did some pretty good work on the show. In the first matchup, he went up against Nathan Fletcher, utilized a grapple-heavy approach to keep Nathan Fletcher on his back, and it was also revealed afterwards that Fletcher actually ended up injuring his leg early in that fight, and that may have played into Ofli's favor. But Ofli, solid grinder, solid grappler, decent striker. He reminds me of a very poor man's Alexander Volkanovski. He grew up in Australia, but actually trains out of Bali. He's a solid athletic specimen, but I don't know if he has the technical skills to fight at the highest level, especially in such a deep division like featherweight. I believe he deserves to be in the UFC, but I just don't know how far he's going to be able to take it. Very solid fighter, decent underdog, but he's going up against a very tough Myron Santos, who only had his defeat against Dan Argueta down at 135 pounds, a weight class in which he struggled to make. He even struggles to make 145 at times. So you can only imagine how bad of a cut it was for him to try to get to 135, and then he got absolutely dominated by Dan Argueta there. But since that matchup, he picked up one big victory in LFA, came in as an underdog, outstruck his opponent and won on the scorecards. And then on the Ultimate Fighter, we saw him have two very solid performances. His first one, he had a very solid victory where he was able to get a win over Edwin Cooper Jr., who's known to be a grapple-heavy fighter, and Santos did a great job in terms of bouncing back after a very stalemate-ish first round. Cooper was able to pin against the cage and try to get some shots off, but not a lot of damage was actually landed there. But in the second and third rounds, Santos was able to keep him at distance, utilize the striking advantage, and batter Cooper Jr. en route to a decision victory. In the second round, he went up against another very strong grappler in Guilherme Torres, and in that matchup, he stopped all the takedowns, did a great job in terms of utilizing his striking, and even scrambled very well so that he can stay alive and stay in positions that he felt most comfortable in. Santos is a nasty striker that started off with the same team that Jessica Andrade was with back in Brazil. PRVT, I believe, was their name. But since, I believe in the last maybe 2 or 3 years, he's moved over to Las Vegas and has set up camp over Extreme Couture. I think the best trait of Santos is the fact that his striking is so calculated, so methodical, and so disciplined, which allows him to really pop his opponents at distance, cause their head to snap back, and strike with a lot of power. His takedown defense is improving, his scrambling is improving, his get-ups are improving, and I think the big advantage he'll have in this matchup is his size. He'll have a 3-inch height advantage as well as an 8-inch reach advantage, and I think that's going to serve him very well here. Obviously, the first round is going to be a very tough one with Ofli looking to implement his grappling, but once he starts slowing down there and Santos is doing a better job in terms of stopping it, he will be able to keep Ofli at distance and really start butchering him, and I also wouldn't be surprised if he ends up knocking him out here. The official prediction is going to be by decision, as Ofli is very tough to put away, but I do think that Santos is the side here, and he's likely worth the chalk. All right, moving over to the second tough finale that we have here. It's in the middleweight division, as we have American Ryan Loder coming in at plus 140, going up against Robert Valentin, who comes in at minus 165. Now, I believe Loder was the last middleweight picked for Team Shevchenko, whereas Robert Valentin was the first middleweight picked for Team Grasso. Loder, wrestle heavy background. You see it in all of his fights. Wrestle. His lone defeated came in a fight where his wrestling did not pay off for him, and he did show some decent work in the striking game, but ultimately his opponent was able to outstrike him and beat him. He did manage to bounce back with 2 big wins over Leon Shahbazyan, where he knocked him out, and then had a grueling decision victory over Lawan Davis. And then on the Ultimate Fighter, got a quick win over Tom Theocaris. And the next fight, he went up against Omran Shoban and put him in some bad spots in the grappling realm and was able to grind that fight out. His striking just about average, maybe just below average, but he can do things that will keep him safe enough in most situations until he's able to get his wrestling going. His scrambling is good. His top pressure is good. Not a huge finishing threat from that top position. I think it's going to be tough for him to try to do that here against Valentin. Valentin, he is a guy that has been out-grappled in the past, but he has improved his game tremendously since then. His last loss did come by submission due to an knee bar, but that was a fight where he was dealing with a wrestle-heavy fighter, and he did a great job in terms of creating reversal opportunities and get-ups, and then getting to his striking where he had the superior advantage. He's a nasty, violent fighter. I think he is the fighter that is most popular after this season amongst the people that actually watched the entire show. He had a nasty elbow knockout over Yanis Bashar in his first tough fight, and then his second fight against Paddy McCrory was a war. He got hurt in that matchup but managed to bounce back and then eventually get an armbar or scarf hold armbar submission to get the tap from McCrory. He's very versatile. He's very good in pretty much in every aspect of MMA. I wish he would improve his takedown defense a little bit more, because that would give me some more confidence in this matchup against Loder. But, anytime Loder tries to posture up and get some strikes off, we're going to see Valentin looking to get some reversals going. He knows all the little intricacies and details, hence why he was a big part of the coaching staff for Team Grasso as well, and which is why you saw him in the corner of some of the fighters when his teammates were competing. He's very good. he's very fun to watch. I think he's much better than his 10-3 record indicates, and I think that this is a matchup he can win strictly off of damage. I think that we'll see Loder get some success early with his wrestling, but as it starts to get into deeper water, Valentin will do a better job in terms of scrambling, creating reversals, get-ups, even stopping some takedowns, and then putting the damaging pressure on Loder, eventually leading to a finish. I'm going to say second or third round. Minus 165 is a little tough for me to, fade a guy who has such smothering wrestling like Loder does, but I believe in Valentin's ability to not give up and settle for bad positions, and that will allow him to create those reversals where he can eventually get off on his damage and eventually find a finish. So I'm going to go Valentin, probably second or third round finish. All right, co-main event here, Angela Hill coming in at minus 115 on a bit of a run here. Coming into the strawweight matchup, going up against Tabitha Ricci, comes in at minus 105. Now, it was really tough for Angela Hill between 2020 and 2022, where she was 1-5 in those 2 years, but she's managed to bounce back and go 4-1 over her last 5 fights, and most recently picking up the first submission victory of her professional MMA career. We know she's a mixed, or at least a striker, a kickboxer, but now she's very much rounding out the mixed martial arts aspect of her game, even though she's 39 years old. We saw her very aggressive in terms of trying to get submissions or at least getting grappling opportunities going against Luana Pinheiro last time around, and that probably just goes to show that she really wanted to improve that aspect of her game. Is she going to find herself in title contention? Probably not. But it is very encouraging to see her still developing her game this late in her career. She's usually all about volume, movement, and a lot of striking. Usually has poor takedown defense, but has done a lot of good things against wrestlers in terms of flashing the uppercut and flashing the knee to kind of discourage opponents from shooting on her. But to see her improving her grappling game in jiu-jitsu, maybe she's a little bit more willing to go to the ground and try to mix it up to try to pull off some submissions, but that may not be the right path to victory against some of the opponents she'll be going against. But one thing she can always rely on is volume and output. She's going up against Tabitha Ricci, who's coming up off a split decision victory over Tisha Pennington last time around. And this is a fighter that came into the UFC with a emphasis on the BJJ black belt that she holds. But we've been seeing her steadily improve her striking game, where she's able to mix it up, especially in the clinch, dirty boxing, some knees. But when she's out in range as well, she can mix it up with her striking and really touch up her opponents. Maybe not with a whole lot of power or a whole lot of damaging, but she's at least able to stay competitive against most opponents. I think where she is best is when she's able to get opponents to the ground and utilize her jiu-jitsu. She's very good from that top position and can really transition to positions to get her some submission opportunities, and I think that's going to be important for her here in this matchup against Hill. I think that she can mix it up with Hill on the feet, but obviously Hill will have a bit of an advantage in that realm, but I think it's going to be important for Ricci to get that respect from Hill so that she can eventually start changing levels, maybe even initiating the clinch and looking to get this fight to the ground. I think there's a lot of hype on Hill right now, which is why she finds herself as the slight favorite here against Ricci, who is normally a favorite amongst the betting public. So to get her at minus 105, I think is a bit of a blessing. Hill will be very competitive and tough to put away, but I think that we'll see the overall mixed martial arts game of Ricci come through, and mostly fueled by her jiu-jitsu and her grappling. I'm hoping she can get this to the ground and even find a submission here. So official prediction will be by decision, but I will be looking to take a sprinkle on the submission prop if it is juicy enough. And that brings us to our main event of the evening in the middleweight division. We got Jared the Killer Gorilla Cannonier coming in at plus 205, going up against Kyle Borralho, who comes in at minus 280. Minus 240, I should say. The line has moved. Just going to do a quick update there. We'll start off on the Cannonier side, who is coming off of a TKO loss to Nasruddin Imavov. That fight took place I believe just less than 3 months ago. I believe it was Kansas City. I could be wrong, but that was the main event. We saw him up on 2 scorecards going into the 4th round, but unfortunately Imavov was able to land some big shots and eventually got a standing TKO. Was it a bad stoppage by Jason Herzog? I think so. I think Cannonier was still in that matchup, and you saw it as soon as that fight stopped that he was protesting the stoppage. But that was a fight that also showed that Cannonier might be slowing down just a smidge. Imavov was getting the better of him as the fight started to go into deeper waters, but Cannonier was still able to get off some good shots, mix in some grappling, even though he was unable to get the takedowns, but did a good job in terms of mixing up the fight as much as possible to try to keep Imavov away from his striking. But when Imavov was in the open space and could get his shots off, he was really touching up Cannonier and making it a rough night. Cannonier is still tough, even at 40 years old, but I think we're going to start to see the decline in his game, especially as he goes up against a guy like Caio Borralho, who currently rides a 15-fight winning streak, only losing his second ever professional MMA fight, and has yet to look back since. Last time around, we saw Borralho pretty much touch up Paul Craig for a round or so before knocking him out in the second round. This guy is a guy that utilized a grapple-heavy approach through his first few fights in the UFC, and a lot of people were very much bored with his approach because he was so successful and so smothering from that top position, but was unable to provide any finishes. The Michal Oleksiejczuk fight changed all of that as he was able to get the submission against Oleksiejczuk, and then in the next fight against Abus Magomedov, he chose to use a striking-heavy approach and outstruck the striker. He utilizes a karate-style stance, blitzing in and out of his opponent's range, landing good shots and pivoting off so that he doesn't eat the brunt of their counters. In the Magomedov fight, he struck with them for about 2.5 rounds before going to his grappling to secure that victory and not allowing Magomedov to rally any sort of comeback. And the Paul Craig fight strictly relied on his striking. Now, in this matchup against Cannonier, Borralho is going to have to mix up the martial arts as best as possible. I think he will have some success in the striking realm against Cannonier, but I could also see him try to lean on the grappling to wear down and slow down the 40-year-old Cannonier, and then start to open up with the striking in the third and fourth rounds. The only thing that we haven't really seen from Borralho is him go into fourth and fifth rounds and still provide as much efficiency as he has in the first 3 rounds, but considering his fight IQ and how intelligent this guy is, I do think that he has a good enough game to at least figure out how to manage his cardio to go 25 minutes if he needs to. Seeing his work at LFA as a commentator, but not to mention all the other things that we see him breaking down fights, he was also one of the few guys that actually called Sean Strickland to defeat Israel Adesanya last year. We know that he has the mental chops to get it done. Let's see if he has the physical chops to actually put his words to the test and actually get the victory here over Cannonier. I believe he can. I think he puts together a good enough mixed martial arts performance here and wins this fight on the scorecards. There you guys go. I managed to get through it. My throat still hurts, but it's fine. We got it done. Full card breakdown for UFC Vegas 96. Appreciate all the love. Appreciate the understanding. Appreciate the well wishes. I'll be back tomorrow for a PFL breakdown, likely Thursday night. So stay tuned for that. But I'll also have the top 3 lock of the night plays and top 3 dog of the night plays for you guys as well. Appreciate the love. Appreciate the support. See you guys tomorrow. Peace.